So hello everyone. We have had a wonderful session in the earlier previous session speaking about how the fin trendsetters or the trending technologies are seen in different parts of the world. Now it's time to see what are the ecosystems doing. How are the ecosystems coming up today and are meeting in line with the times, in line with the needs, and seeing how either a neobank or an insurtech or an AR/VR, all these trending technologies are given the right wings to fly in their own ecosystem. Guiding us through this panel, I am really happy to have a wonderful person like Sweta Shetty, who has been one of the flag bearers of the Indian fintech ecosystem as the former MD of Startup Bootcamp to guide us through the panel. And she has a wonderful panel along with her, right from Sri Lanka, Israel, India, Holland, and Nepal. So we have a whole lot of interesting people here in this panel. And of course, not to undermine Vikram Pandya from SP Jain and Arjun Bhaskaran. Over to you, Sweta. You can quickly take over while we enjoy seeing all of you in action. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Babu, for the kind introduction. Yes, as Babu mentioned, I am really very excited because I have with me a bunch of wonderful trendsetters, insight seekers, and path bearers over here who would give us a deep dive into each of the ecosystems or the regional ecosystems that they have been viewing very closely. So over the next 40-45 minutes, we would get a complete overview of how the stakeholders in an ecosystem are helping. In fact, how do ecosystems in the post-pandemic era look like? What remains similar to the pre-COVID era and what changes? And how is it that the entire fintech ecosystem gets a fillip as part of the differencing role plays that we see amongst all? As we spoke, we have a great panel here. I would take a quick minute to introduce each of them. And in fact, it would be great if you individually speak a line or two about yourself. I have with me to begin with Mr. Nir Netzer, Chairman of Israeli FinTech Association and the founding partner of Ecotech Financial Consulting. I also have Mr. Vikram Pandya, Director of FinTech, SP Jain India, Mr. Rajkumar Kanagasingam, President of FinTech Association of Sri Lanka. I have with me Dr. Pralhad Giri, Deputy Director of Nepal Rastra Bank, Mr. Arjun Bhaskaran, Country Representative, India and Middle East of Gammasec Limited, and Mr. Don Ginsel, CEO of Holland Fintech. Over to you. Can I have Mr. Nir introduce himself really quickly?
Thank you very much. Glad to be here. Thank you very much for hosting me. So yes, I'm Nir Netzer, the chairman of the Israeli FinTech Association, Fintech Aviv in Israel, based in Tel Aviv, and the founding partner of Equitech Group. Fintech Aviv basically established in 2014. Back in 2014, since then we are helping different Israeli startups, more than 1,000 startups in the fintech field, to export their solutions to different markets. We're dealing with payments, lending, blockchain, insurtech solutions, trading platforms, and capital market solutions from all kind. We're dealing with the very broad term and definition of fintech to help financial institutions to better approach their end clients and to help different end clients of the financial institutions to get better service and more efficient banking opportunities. So thank you for hosting me. I'm glad to be here.
Thanks, Nir. Vikram?
Sure. So I'm Director of FinTech at SP Jain School of Global Management. I'm also founder and CEO of Association for Emerging Technologies. And as a part of academia and industry, I have been trying to create this ecosystem and which is developing. And I'm also a FinTech ambassador for Master Government Uday platform. Thank you.
Lovely. Dr. Pralhad?
Hi, this is Pralhad Giri. I'm a fintech enthusiast and leader from Nepal Rastra Bank. I'm working as a deputy director in microfinance institution supervision department, and we have been seeing the very surging development in the fintech ecosystem over here in Nepal. Now the significant users have been significantly increasing, and we have been supporting them from all aspects. Especially, we are encouraging the investor as well from the domestic and from international as well. So, and we are now, constitution new framework for the all fintech related regulations. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Mr. Arjun.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. I've been working for about 2 decades in the insurtech space. Parallelly, I've been working on the cybersecurity opportunities also. And last 2 years, I've been putting together with the Israeli collaboration from Gammasec into a very unique area of combining insurance and cyber into cyber insurance. Okay, so we are trying to build two things, expand the cyber insurance ecosystem in India and in the region, and to promote better cyber security across the BFSI spectrum. So that's
We
what
look
I've been
forward to
working
hearing.
on. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Mr. Don.
Yeah, good afternoon and good morning to you from Amsterdam. I represent Holland Fintech, set up about 6.5 years ago to basically connect the European ecosystem, starting out in the Netherlands, but I think we've got a network now that reaches out throughout most of Europe and even beyond. And what we try to do is actually connect not just upcoming startups and scale-ups, which are many, of course, but we really like to include all the BFSIs that are in transformation, as well as all the service providers around it. Because I think the biggest trend that fintech has to offer is still that actually increased connectivity allows for a proper value chain to emerge. And I think that's actually what fintech stands for mostly, a strong potential for collaboration.
Thank you so much. Maybe we should quickly start off with your quick thoughts, each of your thoughts on how the ecosystem in your markets, particularly in the fintech and emerging tech space, look like. Yes, in the context of the pandemic era. Would love to start with Nir.
Okay, great. Thank you. So, in 2020, back in 2020, we saw many fintech fields and subsegments that got a really a back push from the pandemic situation. Everything that's related to trading, capital markets, of course, was on the rise. Fractional trading, commissionless trading, same as Robinhood offered to the investors in the US market. So we saw also Israeli investors enjoying different platforms and different solutions. eToro was, of course, one of the capital market platforms that were on the rise. And we saw also in the insurtech space, this segment enjoyed from different insurance policies, car insurance, which is basically UBI, user-based insurance. We saw the IPO of Lemonade, insurtech company in the US market. So we saw that the insurtech company, insurtech segment along to the capital market segment that were on the rise. Of course, that cybersecurity also got a big push in the pandemic. In this situation, Arjun just mentioned the cybersecurity policies or the cyber insurance policies. This was really important for companies that got basically damaged from different hackers, and we saw ransom situation from different hackers based on Bitcoin and different cryptocurrencies. So cyber insurance also was on the rise, definitely. And last but not least, probably also everything that's related to lending, pay now, buy now, pay later, and different solutions that allows different end clients to purchase goods and to pay in a later stage because of the cash flow and the liquidity problems. So we saw these kind of solutions also on the rise in the Israeli ecosystem.
That's interesting. Arjun, what would be your take on insurance, cybersecurity, and the segments?
Yeah, in my observation, the one is the Indian ecosystem. and another is regional. But when we refer to ecosystem, it's also how each of the subsegments are also influencing each other also. One of the things that I observed is there are some cross-cutting themes. Data security, GDPR has been affecting every underlying sector. And when we say everything is going digital, digital assets, like we saw about the cyber attack on the power projects. Now my question is, what happens to the insurance of the power projects? Now this is something that has not been thought about, and we have seen our power projects as physical assets only. Another one is this: Tesla is entering India. Now we are used to conventional motor insurance, but Tesla is a connected, intelligent car. So there is transformational things happening because of changes in digital across every asset. And the other one is Aadhaar and digital identity, which is enabling payment systems, also brings in data protection and liabilities associated with that. So that is going to push cyber liability in a big way in the Indian market. So the and ransomware, as Nir said, it's affecting all small businesses also. So I see huge traction in insurtech, in cyber-related opportunities in insurance or banking across the financial sector. And this, the digital transformation is changing finance itself.
And like you rightly said, Arjun, we are moving from the hard assets to, let's say, something like insurance as a service. And that's pretty much going to be case with the risk assessment and assessing the risk appetite of newer assets that actually now hit the market. Vikram, what would your view be? And earlier at the backstage, I was discussing with Vikram, and he even pointed out to the fact that how do you actually define an ecosystem, and who are the stakeholders who actually have that interplay of either taking the ecosystem, making it flourish, or otherwise.
Sure, definitely. So I agree with first of all with Nir and others who mentioned that we require ecosystem which is flexible enough. And you may have seen that the pandemic shock, those startups and those companies were able to very well wherever you saw the entire value chain, which was much more flexible. Otherwise, you cannot take that shock, right? So that is the first thing, where the ecosystem needs to be flexible enough to absorb that shock, and the value chain plays very critical role. So companies where entire payment as well as, let's say, customer onboarding, everything was online or digital in a way, were able to first of all survive much better. And now let's come to your question, which is about who are the participants of the ecosystem. How do you define that, right? So if I were to talk about the ecosystem here, you start with the companies, corporates, which are already there in the market, and then you are adding BFSI as a sector, and then you are talking about startups, then you are talking about regulator, including government, then you are talking about academia, and you are talking about the other mentors, right? Because they are there in the industry and they want to make sure that they can pass on the value. So this is what creates the entire ecosystem. And when you look at this ecosystem, it is very fragile, and sometimes what happens, it is very difficult to say that, okay, I can start ecosystem, but very difficult to actually create something meaningful. And that is where I think everyone will need to combine the effort, cooperate, and coordinate to make it big. Because in small pockets, we all are doing certain things, but the impact wise, it will only make a dent in the universe when we are trying to come together, work together. And definitely this entire panel is from different geography, different, and this is what we want really. Definitely agree. Thanks.
Right. Can I have Dr. Pralhad give his 2 cents on what he sees emerging?
Actually, fintech ecosystem here in Nepal being developed, and we saw the people's more interest and more inclination towards fintechs. And the people now, they are using the financial transaction using technology. They seem as if they don't need any bank and financial institution. Rather, they want is through the decentralized service. and various services are being coming up. And one thing I would like to focus, as I said earlier in the backstage also, the fintech ecosystem, mostly here in Nepal, being dominated through the payment system. We are yet to harness the basic other financial transactions such as the insurance, digital lending still. So ecosystem is being developed. And right away, we also are in the central bank also building the right and appropriate frameworks in order to boost and encourage the firms and companies in order to bring agile system, it's market-friendly system for both the investors, for the fintech firms, as well as for the customers. What customers want at the moment at this cross-cutting is, they want reliability, they want security on their transaction, they want easy to use, they want very customer-friendly, they want hassle-free. So all these things have to be taken into consideration. I mean, while putting and enabling the framework from the regulator side. And from the investor side, also the government of Nepal and the authorities also have encouraged to bring the investments toward the in the fintech fraternity. And one more thing I would like to add in this ecosystem, that we are seeing the rapid aspiration of the changes from the user side. Now the capital market in Nepal is booming. Still, there is a big problem in the cyber security. I mean, sometimes it goes, unexpectedly out of order or something, and they don't being backed up or support from the what it should be. So, capital market itself and from the acquiring land and buildings in Nepal, now it's going to be through the all online. So also we are integrating the land markets, transaction in the land markets, as well as the capital
Land
markets.
register.
Yeah. So this is encouraging trend. So the ecosystem is now being developed, and we're still bagging behind. I mean, on the basic financial transaction through the technology. Payment is there, but what about the digital lending? So digital lending is being focused and priming forefront in the regulations at the moment.
Thanks, Dr. Pralhad. I'm going to come back on what can be done as support systems even across borders in a bit on
Yeah,
that
regional
topic.
cooperation at the moment it's also gaining momentum in the European countries as well as in the least developed countries in the Asian emerging economies. So Nepal, Bhutan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, these small economies in the South Asian region also desperately needs to have the cooperation in the place, not only the financial cooperation but as to technology cooperation, how to harness those things. And one more thing is the cyber security. Cyber security is major considerable fact as far as the data security and digital assets being taken into consideration. That is more important. So cyber security is a prime concern over the years, and now we are also accepting the things. How do we go ahead with the data security with the best and appropriate data security?
All right. Thank you so much for that. Don, your quick view on what do you see emerging?
Yeah, so I think it's really interesting to see how these different ecosystems are playing out. And I also recognize some of the challenges that Vikram, for example, was mentioning about that you actually, the strongest ecosystems we see worldwide are very often shaped around a specific interest from a certain party, right? So you, for example, have a big tech firm that actually attracts a lot of parties, and that forms an ecosystem by itself, which is really sustainable way, but not really open. And I think actually what we're trying to do, all of us here, is to actually to create a neutral ground for many types of actors to come together and sort of discover where fintech is going. But it's a more challenging task because there's not a specific business model per se behind that could actually grow you into a unicorn by doing this. So that actually makes the job quite hard, I would say. Although we see that especially now the drive towards open banking is really putting a big pressure on developments in personal finance. And so actually giving consumers a much better 360-degree view of their finances and being able to plug in new products there, I think is a really big drive. Although that's, of course, quite different in Europe than it is, for example, in India, where the government is playing a very strong role in spurring that and actively playing a role there to also facilitate with technology. You see, for example, in Europe that just the regulations have been adjusted and the market needs to adapt, and that takes a bit longer.
on the value proposition that is being edged through the institutions across the countries. I mean, Holland Fintech now, I think, as far as I came to know through their own various literacies being spread out through the emails and various networks among the various months, how the things is gathering across the countries. I mean, the communication is also vital among the institutions as well as the regulators, as well as the firms and innovators. That is also need to be taken into consideration.
Pralhad, I would want to pitch in here. Maybe we'll come back to cross-border collaboration a little later, and I do want to hear your views on that. But first off, I would like to understand how has the investment scenario been in each of the markets? Do you see more early stage financing being infused in the ecosystem, or has the use and source of funds started to change course? Maybe from larger incumbent players in each of the markets as more consolidation sees the light of the day. How are the early stage and the scale level companies trying to strengthen their foothold? Arjun, what's your take?
In my observation, there is a very good traction from both sources, both portfolio capital at all levels, angel, Series A, and even private equity. There is a tremendous traction is being observed, and there is also very good interest from direct FDI kind of investors, strategic investors, who are investing across the value chain and across sectors and across sizes also. So, and I am seeing that in 2021, it's going to be even better, maybe 2 to 3x of what happened in 2020. That's my observation. And the investment opportunities are India and the regional opportunities.
All right. Would you actually agree to that, Don? And how is your ecosystem actually attracting more fintech talent from overseas? Or how do you actually see the interplay from, let's say, Holland and the markets around in Europe? How are the outbound activities like?
Yeah, so I think maybe to start with your first question about the investment climate, I think in general what you see that it has been quite a ride over the past year, because I think in general when the COVID crisis with lockdowns first hit, I think there was a lot of frustration and fear in the market that turned down all investments for a second. I think then what we saw that quite soon people started to pick up on that some big champions will emerge. So especially somewhat more mature scale-up fintech companies were really benefiting from the fact that everyone had this big push towards digital contactless payments, online shopping, and so on, that also the capital started flowing again. I think with especially younger companies, so really early startup, it took a while longer for that to pop up again, especially since, a couple of reasons. There was a lot of uncertainty how they would play out in the new market. And at the beginning, we really weren't used to working remotely. And so customers, they couldn't connect to new customers because everyone said like, yeah, we want to talk to you when we can meet you again. And I think that was the attitude at the beginning, which stopped a lot of business from continuing. I think now we've almost a year further, we're much further in actually doing business online now. And we might be able to do much more without actually meeting each other. So I think that's a big plus. And of course, we had the investment climate on the stock exchanges as well. That provided a very big investment opportunity for a lot of people. So there was a lot of attention focused on that. And I think that's where... That's why I think, let's say, earlier last year we didn't see so many fintech investments in the smaller segment, but it really picked up again towards the end of the year. So I think that's going quite well at the moment, and especially now I think we've got a big boost also through Brexit that just took place on the 1st of January. And now, for example, Amsterdam has taken over the trading volumes of London to a large exchange, and I think that again puts in a big boost. Because in the end, venture capital flows where there's a potential for exits, right? So if you can do IPOs, or what's more contemporary these days, to do it through a SPAC, a special purpose acquisition company, When that option is open, there also is a really strong flow of new venture capital coming to the market that is aiming to make these kind of exits. So we see a big benefit there. And just to pick up on your talent challenge, I think the toughest thing is that very often entrepreneurs they fix a problem that they recognize. So, for example, if interchange fees are a problem in your market, like for example in the US, company are actually fixing that problem. But for example, in Europe, nobody understands anything about interchange fees because they don't see it on their bill. They don't pay for it, or at least they don't recognize it. So no one is solving that problem. So from a US company, for example, to move to that market is really challenging because it's just a completely different dynamic. And already we see those kind of difference also between European markets. Like, for example, in Germany, where they love cash, right? And so you actually have a lot of fintechs that are focusing on hybrid solutions that involve cash. Well, these solutions don't fit, for example, in the Dutch market or in the Nordics because they hardly know cash anymore. And so you get these completely different ecosystems with a different perspective. UK, for example, with a multi-banking environment. So you have a lot of challengers focusing on solving the multi-bank challenge. While in a lot of other European countries, most citizens only have one mature bank account. So they also don't recognize the problem. And I think that makes, to a certain extent, a limited portability of solutions from one market to the other. While at the same time, of course, we also know that there are some generic companies. Think about facilitating e-commerce, which is quite generic across nations, cybersecurity, fraud prevention, and of course, with sort of further harmonization of legislation, like the EU is doing around money laundering, open banking, and so on, we see that much more solutions actually have the capability to scale across the boundaries.
I'll go to Vikram next. And picking on from what Don said, what is your view of how the sources of capital have changed? I mean, yes, in the US and in the West, we see a lot more SPAC kind of instruments coming, for example. Have you seen that as an interest area that is building here locally as well? That is one question. The other one is, how do you actually see influx of talent when it comes to India?
Sure, thanks, Sweta. Very relevant question. And let me start by adding to what Dom said. First of all, when you are looking at on the ecosystem where the investment is happening, we have seen last year there were more value chasers rather than just looking at something which is innovative and just putting money, or a risk capital was lower. So we have seen value chasers more in the last year because we also have a venture capital fund called Verenium Next Gen. So we have seen in the market that this has happened overall. Then another thing what we have noticed that most of the rounds are convertible rounds because they are not able to justify that, okay, whether I should be able to give this valuation or not, right? So you are now doing a convertible round more. That's what another thing that I have noticed everywhere, even right from seed to even series C. Now, when you look at the other side, another source which was not feasible or not attractive, now it is more attractive, which is venture debt. And venture debt, as we know, because of the rates going down in the market and everything, has become viable alternative from the raising fund, right? So mainly if you look at some of the revenue generating company are able to do revenue discounting and get venture debt or some form of debt. And that is a trend which we have seen. On the other hand, when you look at, again, from the corporate side, the demand is still picking up, right? So companies which were able to absorb the shock, as I mentioned very well, they are already up and running. They are in fact growing further. So believe me, when you look at fintech in India and ASEAN countries, specifically, it has grown further, specifically into digital lending and digital payments, insurtech, and wealth tech. So across this, if I were to rank, payment followed by lending, the digital lending, insurtech and wealth tech has grown a lot. Now let's talk about talent side. Talent is very much, let's say, subjective when you look at that, because if you look at average age of a fintech founder, it is 34 years. So today what happens is that fintech requires talent across the spectrum. One is on the tech side, which is a traditional talent, but they want it for emerging technology. So they are ready to take that bet on the graduate and then they want to train them. That is one thing. which is good, very good. So you want to create professional entrepreneurs in the market, and that is something very good, I believe. You want to create job creators rather than job seekers. So that is one part. Second thing, when you look at from the mid management level, that is where I think the most demand is, where they have got some experience in the banking industry or any other BFSI sector, and now they are looking to migrate to fintech. That is where the most value is, because people are really wanting to look at someone who is experienced, and that someone can bring that expertise in that fintech. So that is the main area where the migration is happening and talent is required. So reskilling is happening very well. And when you talk about even our program, right? So we have on an average a participant who is with 15 plus years of work ex. So that is the way we look at the fintech education, because we believe that fresher cannot add too much value, but at the same point in time, the mid and senior management who are trying to either create something on their own, or who are trying to, let's say, add something to their existing company. So that is what I believe the talent looks like today in the market. Thank you.
Vikram, one follow-up question on that. Do you think the reason for that is because fintech as an industry is so heavily compliance oriented and regulated, and which seems to be very different as a need from the talent side, from the supply side itself, when it comes to, let's say, any other industry where building a cool app could then become the next big thing?
No, definitely I agree. But another thing which I would like to highlight here, so when you look at from the grassroots level, right? Because we also run this FinTech Yatra with Vishant Pant and FinTech Meetup. So if you look at from the grassroots level, if you meet people on the ground, you realize that uh, FinTech is a business which you can't go and do directly B2C. It is not easy to do that. So you need to start with somewhere B2B2C model or B2B model. Right? That is the easiest way you can start any FinTech company. And when you look at, for that matter, you require good network. And when you are having that good network, I think minimum experience that you require will be around 10 years minimum, right? So that will put you around 34 years of age. And that is one major reason behind it. And second, what you mentioned is absolutely correct. You need to know about regulation. You need to know also about that, okay, security should be by design. It should not be afterthought. And you need to also appreciate that you can't do everything. So you need to also add people, right talent at the right time, right place to grow. So all these things will require you to have some experience, prior experience. Before that, you can jump into the market. Thanks.
Thank you. Arjun would like to understand from you, when it comes to data security, how important has it been now, given GDPR and other regulations that are, traversing across geographies? How would you see that, especially in a post-pandemic kind of a situation?
In the post-pandemic, the cyber risks have gone up, manifold times, involving all large enterprises, SME, and even individuals. Everyone is conscious of that. But the other big dimension that's going to come is on the data protection. See, our own version of GDPR, which is the Personal Data Protection Act, that has been on the annual, and it was speculated that it might get passed in January. Maybe it may happen in the remainder of the budget session, maybe in March, April. So that I expect is going to have a very large expansion of data security and related products, financial products in the Indian market across all sectors. Okay. So I would say it will be like an IPL happening for in the data security space. It will touch every life and every sector. I'm feeling that we need to get ready for that boom that's going to come.
And how do you view the inorganic growth path of taking the fintech or insurtech space ahead?
We have seen very large unicorns like Policy Bazaar. That is a big inspiration for the whole industry. Size is many investors and entrepreneurs are trying to go for a unicorn or that level of positioning, but it's a very big market, and your action is happening at both levels, at the large level and at the micro level also. So we see organic and inorganic initiatives happening. And the insurance is an industry which across the world, is ripe for disruption. So everyone, like earlier, Don said, we all understand the problem, and we're trying to come up with innovation and better cost structure, more efficiency. So there's a collective effort happening across the industry and across continents on this.
Understood. Don, what's your view on? So just this morning, as I was reading, Square has acquired a stake in Tidal, which is Jay-Z's company. Creator economy funding, B2C from a creator production / consumption standpoint. But do you see such very interesting fintech collaborations happening, which otherwise I wouldn't even imagine, in the bucket of fintech, so
it's quite unique. It's quite unique. I think that we see that, and I think it's interesting to see. I mean, they might also be just personal friends that struck a deal here somewhere on the sideline. But I think here it's interesting to see that. I think let's say it's not so normal for payment firms or other BFSIs to actually move into other industries, because indeed, as you mentioned before, the heavy regulation turns it into quite a specific industry with certain burdens that you might not want to drag into other industries where you could actually also set up a much lighter model. But at the same time, I also see that a lot of financial institutions are looking for ways to find additional revenue streams. I mean, the interest margins are completely have faded away, so the traditional banking model is already not really feasible anymore. And you see that also there's a lot of pressure on payment fees and other fees that actually allow for companies to make money. And so increased compliance pressure and a decreased potential of earnings is, of course, a challenge for most BFSIs. And so I think I really recognize that they're all trying to discover new ways of adding value and therefore new business models. But this is quite unique, I think. And I would really see it in the light of the fact that we become much more accustomed now to pay for media, given also the discussions in Australia, where now also Facebook and Google are, for example, being forced to start paying for the use of journalism from public sources. And I think this is in the same way. I think we're at the current time that we actually, the internet, we should go to a premium version of the internet where there's actually paid content, and I think a streaming service like this fits into that very nicely. And I think it's smart to, let's say, for a payment organization like Square to go into that, to be facilitating there, because I think the whole subscription model plus pay-per-use, I think will go booming, I think, given those developments in the market.
I think so too. Dr. Pralhad, over to you here on how do you see the regulator playing a role in actually boosting or adding more support? Do you see the regulator playing an active role in actually helping take certain decisions, or are you of the opinion that an enablement role, so to say, would be a more supportive take?
Thank you, Sweta. I have seen some of the divergence, some of the transforming, some changes over the years in the fintech market. And as far as the investment is concerned, there have been some angel investors, and those are from the private equity funding as well, and from those already established companies as well, those traditional companies who don't have their own technical capabilities, but they have now lifted into the fintech companies as they have embraced the technicalities into the system. So they want to get these things, show the profit or kind of growth from the fintech companies. And one more thing, as I also am quite agree with Don, who said the thing is that the banks and financial institutions in this changing context, or you can say the post-pandemic era, they have now transformed how to make growth, aiding some values, some another way, rather than own their legacy kind of banking. I mean, I would say there have been various significant cuts in the compliances, in the fees, in the processing fees, in even there is a downward trend, even in the income. So the fact is that because there is a transformation. So they want to make some growth. They want to continue their growth from another ways. That's why the banks and financial institutions itself, they are investing in the technology in terms of providing more solutions to the customer, and the customer itself. Customer also are they are just going through in the way, so that they don't need bank, but they want the financial transaction, the banking, all everything without having a bank. A kind of this kind of situation is going on. So the regulator kind of perspective is that regulator is quite waiting and watch the situation, and they are also taking various harmonization. I mean, the harmonization situation is going on among the legislation within the territories. I mean, from the Basel Accord, from the BIS, and from country-wise legislation also. A big review is also going on post-pandemic situation from every countries, every central bank, and how this new trend is emerging. They have been taken into consideration, and new kind of responses in terms of the framework and strategies being developed. And regulator is, by the way, is very supportive, but they have yet to know the divergence, the paradigm shift in the growth, even from the traditional banking, and they won't harm to the consumer itself. So they are all these things are been in the various radar within the regulators. Sweta.
Thank you. Nir, would love to understand from you. Israel has traditionally been an economy that supplies technology to the whole world. I mean, when it comes to technology in security or AI, when it comes to data-led models, how do you see that shaping up now? And how's really the influx and the cross-border participation been like?
Yeah, so traditionally, I think that indeed cybersecurity was leading the Israeli market towards export different. We were exporting different cybersecurity solutions to the world in the last 10, 20 years already. But I think that, yes, you're right. Definitely, deep tech is something that Israeli entrepreneurs and engineers are excelled in. I mean, if you look at different AI-based solutions, machine learning solutions, even blockchain capabilities that Israeli engineers lead. So we see around the globe different ventures that are sprouting from Israel, serving different markets in these deep tech fields. You also mentioned different investments and solutions. We saw in Q2 and Q3 of 2020, we saw really later stages investments. And these investments were made in as follow-on investments, basically. If private equity companies and venture capital were investing in follow-on investments in their existing portfolios. In Israel, these investments were done also in deep tech companies, in cybersecurity companies, and in the traditional segments that Israel is well known of. In Q4 and nowadays in Q1 2021, we see different investors that are back to early stage investments. So we see also early stage investments such as seed, A rounds investments that are enjoying different traction of different investors around the globe. Interesting research we saw recently. In Israel specifically, 73% out of investments are coming from foreign investors. So we see that Israel is not a capital market, it's a tech market, and we're tracking investments from foreign investors in different regions around the globe. And another interesting piece of information that Israel is not considered to be a market at all to the Israeli ventures. Only 10% out of the Israeli ventures are basically selling to the Israeli market. 90% of Israeli tech is exported to different regions. So that's how we see that Israeli deep tech is serving different financial institutions around the globe, either if it's the banking industry, the insurance industry, investment houses from all kinds, and of course, credit card bureaus with payment solutions. We see Israeli tech is serving all these guys.
All right. Have you seen a difference in the valuations that these companies are being sold at or looked at? Have valuations seen a dip, and is it the best time for a strategic investor to sort of make a bet?
It's a good question. It's hard to tell. I would say, a year ago, Q2, Q3, we experienced a valuation drop. At the beginning of the COVID-19 situation, we saw a valuation drop. We saw different opportunities for venture capital companies to invest in different companies and technology companies in lower valuations, or opportunistic investors who are enjoying different deals that were quite interesting deals. Nowadays, I think that we see the valuations go back up again, and we see different SPACs that are serving, as Don said, that are serving different technology companies. We saw different SPACs sprouting out of Israel. Just now, Payoneer got their SPAC outside to the US market. So yeah, we see the valuations go up again, not just for Israeli companies, by the way, for in the global fintech ecosystem. Yeah, we see that.
Sweta, one point I wanted to bring to notice. Since you're talking about ecosystems, there's something very interesting happening in the second half of 2020 after the Middle East and Israel, peace accords. So there is a huge influx of, Israeli technology and capital into the Middle East. And at the Middle East, it's a meeting ground of Israeli initiatives, Indian talent, expertise, and from the Europe also. So I find Middle East is a action-packed area with the confluence of all this happening in the ecosystem.
I would agree, an interesting ecosystem to look at. I've just been reminded that we have the last couple of minutes to go. So I would love to hear one last closing remark, maybe top 2 priorities that the ecosystem should have, probably led by the government, as you may want to highlight for each of the ecosystems. Vikram.
Sure, thanks. I think I believe that government should lead the ecosystem normally, and government in India has done good job with that. And however, when you look at multiple different government, they are having their own corridors, so that will definitely help. But along with that, regulator should also speak to each other. So today we have in India 3 different sandboxes. So maybe there we require more effort. So that is my key takeaway from the ecosystem.
Thank you, Pralhad.
Yeah, I also reiterated the fact that this there has to be some coordination within the regulators and within the government authorities, because the various frameworks that shape the policy and shape the development and growth of the ecosystem of the fintech is still in the hand of the better coordination. So regulators across the countries, across the regions as well, need to coordinate each other in order to make some good decisions for the fostering growth of the fintech ecosystem.
Thank you. Arjun.
I think regulators are doing a fantastic job in India, but more needs to be done by the industry bodies. Probably the CII, FICCI, they should get more proactive into action-oriented initiatives. And same is true for the industry bodies like Indian Banks Association or the insurance councils. So they need to get into the act much more. AMFI also, in fostering fintech innovation. They should do more. Regulators are doing fantastic.
Thanks for that. Don, what's your last word?
Yeah, thanks. I really enjoyed the conversation. So thanks for that. I just want to emphasize that I think an ecosystem is hard to create, right? So I think we know that from biology as well, is that it's actually something that just emerges based on the right boundary conditions. And I think that's also something that we should really see. So indeed, the government and the regulators need to play their role to create these boundary conditions. But indeed, all the actors also need to play their own role to participate. And I think especially there, the notion of from competition to collaboration and how that interplays, and actually that is not a one-way street, but actually is quite iterative, is something I think that everyone needs to embrace. And I think that's the biggest learning I think that we can share as well, also across these ecosystems. So thanks for sharing today.
Thank you. Nir, what's your last word?
So yeah, I think that governmental arms in Israel are collaborating in a very good manner with the fintech ecosystem here. The chief scientist or the innovation authority is deploying funds in companies to back them up and to support the Israeli export of different fintechs to different regions. We also see in Israel, there is a sandbox and an open banking regulations that comes up. We're right behind Europe in this, and we are also adopting different regulations that will help fintechs to grow in the Israeli market. So we see that's going on. That's going on quite nicely.
Thanks, Nir. I would like to add one last word from my side. As different players of the ecosystem all across the globe, I think the onus lies with us to be able to voice the needs both largely from the supply side, from the fintech side, and be able to communicate in the right fashion to the regulators so that they take a more sound and an informed view of things. And I think each of the ecosystems, regulators of each of the markets have been more proactive than ever. And I couldn't think of a better time to actually evolve and progress the ecosystem further. It was a great 45 minutes or probably a little more than that of conversation with you guys. Lovely hearing your insights on what you've been seeing closely. I look forward to continuing the conversation, collaborating with all of you, and seeing how we can actually create a more sound and a sustainable ecosystem for all the participants going forward. Thank you so much for your time. This was really wonderful listening to each one of you. And let's keep talking. Let's keep the conversations going. Thanks so much.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.